Hi, and welcome to the Google Cloud and Nokia series on the cloudification of telecom provider networks. Why now and how? I'm Max Kamenetsky, Group Product Manager of Cloud Networking at Google Cloud.
I am Jitin Bhandari, Chief Technology Officer for Cloud and Network Services at Nokia.
Jitin, in a prior conversation, we talked about some of the consideration of what it means to be cloud native. Maybe at this point we should talk in a little bit more detail as to some of the design and architectures for telecom workloads. So specifically, there's Kubernetes. There are a number of open source technologies that can reside on top of it. How do we put all of this together to enable high performance telecom workloads to function?
What this time around the standards bodies and the technology forums of 5G has done is fundamentally they have shifted the design and principles to be more what I call network function defragmentation. Take the case of subscriber data management, right? This time around is just not the subscriber data management for your data and voice application, but it's the subscriber data for end all be all. And if you look at the design and architectures, it's been broken down into notification engine, subscription engine, the back end, the front end is segregated from the back end. The front end can handle interfaces like legacy interfaces like LDAP and can take future interfaces like HTTP and scale independently. Take in case in point, the control user plane segregation topic we keep talking about, both in the data space where workloads and application needs to segregate itself, and you need to design architectures and principles where the control plane is scaling at a different level and the user plane can take those maximum line rate performance all the way to 1 terabits per second. So if you look at it, the beautiful aspect of standards this time around, and it's evolving really fast, is that they are promoting for that design and architecture that goes for scale, that goes for reuse, and those goes for microservices pieces. But to your point, right, one thing that always comes near and dear to our telco applications is network acceleration. So why don't you share some views about, how is the web scalers in the fintech industries, in other parts of the sectors, how did you combat the hunger for bandwidth for applications and the network acceleration?
Oh, what a great question. What's actually happening here is when you look at high performance workloads, especially workloads that need to reside at the edge, one of the great things that's been happening in the industry is we now have this separation of hardware and software. No longer do you have these sort of monolithic appliances that you had in the past. But when you do that, how can you actually get the performance out of the hardware that you need, and in fact, out of the entire solution? You need to have technologies that enable your application, as an example, to communicate directly with the network interface card, bypassing the kernel. So you are able to process packets at the maximum rate that that card permits you to do. Or as another example, you need to have technologies for processor affinity or memory access that really make sure that the CPU or the memory are not the bottlenecks overall in your architecture. So ultimately, you are getting the value out of the investment that you made. Similar things can be said about the hypervisor. At this point, a hypervisor is actually a performance detractor as opposed to a benefit. So you need to look at technologies that enable you to run on bare metal. Again, it's all about how do you make sure that those workloads at the edge with the minimum latency, with the highest performance, are actually achieving what you need.
Well, that's a fantastic point, actually. We're just coming from the virtualization era ourselves, and, a lot of workloads are being deployed out there on virtual platforms. And one of the beautiful things we see very quickly when we walk away from hypervisors theory and go into bare metal, the acceleration technologies and toolkits is becoming richer and richer out there. We know about data plane development kits. We know about how we are doing acceleration and high packet through rate at line rate, especially for applications which are data plane sensitive. And one thing we are seeing is there will be a slow migrations of workloads from virtual network functions to container network functions, or what we call CNFs. And then during these migrations, it's just not about the ability of a workload to perform, but also to manage, operate. I'm talking about the lifecycle management of it. And, this is one piece which has got two layers of complexity or challenges, if I may say. One is, this time around, when we introduce workloads into container applications, how do we make sure the promise of lifecycle management really holds true, right? We're talking about upgradability, updatability, heal and scale of applications. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is that we are actively thinking about there will be a co-location of workloads of both virtual functions and container functions. How do you design lifecycle management that handles both aspects of it?
Oh, what a question. There's a couple of things that I'd like to say about this. The first is that you are completely right. I would love to live in a world where all the workloads were containerized today. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And I do believe they will be containerized over time, but that will take a little bit of time. Unfortunately, also what is happening today is not sustainable. Where you have infrastructure that is dedicated to virtualized workloads and separate infrastructure that's dedicated to containerized workloads creates tremendous complexity, doesn't permit you to scale, creates stovepipes. This is not what you want to have. You want to have a single set of managed infrastructure, Kubernetes running on top of that, and the ability to seamlessly place either virtualized workloads or containerized workloads, and to orchestrate all of that. So how do you do this? One key piece to this is Anthos, because what we found is that many customers were running not just separate virtualized and containerized sets of infrastructure, but they were running it across private data centers, across public clouds, across the edge. So now you have all these different sets of tooling that you need to be aware of, that you need to maintain, and your life then is focused on the tooling as opposed to the business applications that you want to have, which are really deriving value to your enterprise. We strongly believe that when you have a coherent, cohesive platform that gives you lifecycle management, security, operations, configuration, policy, and removes all that from you having to manage that, you're then free to focus on the things you do need to focus on.
No, that's actually a very valid point, because a large part of the discussion around 5G is about value creation, and which ties up to the concepts of slicing, which ties up to the concepts of creation of a service or a service intent network. And you're spot on. So if you take what you're talking about, the platform ability to lifecycle manage an application, and then you take the chaining of the application to creation of a service, and eventually creating to a service intent network in a hierarchical order, is actually the nirvana state for all of us. So we are moving largely into a software world. And we are saying that the networks aspects, the radio aspects, the platforms aspects, the operations, everything is going to be software. And we're talking about a huge landscape of software that being rolled into the network. And, Nokia started its software journey many years back. And one thing we have been successfully being able to do is how do we evolve the transitions of continuous integration and continuous deliveries in sort of, 4, 8, 12 weeks timelines, as we provide very cohesive software applications. Every release over release is enriched on more features and functionality, but also be the capability of this continuous delivery to a network operators. Because when you go to the operators arena, you're just not talking about introducing a new feature, but also a new use case. And how do you validate that new use case from a network's perspective, not just from an application's perspective? So the challenge of today's telco networks is, as you consume that new feature set for that ultimate use case, how's that continuous delivery pipeline is being delivered? And, this is a new concept for telcos, I must say. I would like to know your views of how is continuous delivery and integrations is happening out there in the platforms of GCP with other workloads.
Jitin, it's interesting that you mentioned 4, 8, 12-week timelines, because when you think about the word continuous delivery, it actually calls for continuous delivery. So how do we get there? One thing to talk about is a change of mindset. Rather than having very large upgrades that happen infrequently, we should be thinking about small upgrades that happen frequently. Because with small upgrades, the changes are by definition smaller, more incremental. It's also easier to roll them back. Another benefit of small upgrades is that you're continuously delivering that value of the new features to your users. Now, the good news is that there are principles and methods that already exist for this. Technologies such as site reliability engineering, which fundamentally change how your operations teams are structured and how they think about the work that they're doing. Or automated testing and deployment tools that really enable you to have this kind of continuous innovation cycle. Or whether some of the technologies that we've actually introduced in Anthos, such as the Anthos service mesh, which enables you very easily to have a canary type of deployment, where as you start deploying a microservice, you first put it into a staging environment, and then you can gradually start populating this into your production environment. If anything goes bad, there's an easy rollback path. Otherwise, you deploy it into your entire environment.
Oh, that's actually phenomenal. You're using some words like canary testing. And, we at Nokia have been thinking quite a bit about this for the last 12 months of our journey as we are accelerating. And the beautiful thing is, Max, and it so resonates, because of our services experience and ability to operate and manage telco workloads. One thing that we are really, really looking at, and this is going to be fun to co-create with Google, is around test automation frameworks and how do we create the concepts of digital twins as well. So absolutely, this is one concept that has to come to mainstream and require some real cool innovations from both chapters, the telcos and the web scalers, for sure here.
Jitin, thank you very much for this conversation today. Thanks for catching our discussion on the cloudification of telco networks. We'll see you next time in the cloud.